You wake before the sun, but not before the sound. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, not the clatter of servants, not the shuffle of guards. This is the sound of finality, the kind that walks slowly because it already knows where it's going. Your eyes open, and the ceiling of the tower stares back. Blank stone, indifferent, cracked like the promises that brought you here. They told you it would be quick. They told you it would be merciful. They told you the Frenchman was skilled, that he used a sword, not an axe, as if the type of steel mattered. The air tastes like wet iron. Your hands are cold even though you haven't moved them. And the gown they've brought for you, the grey one, plain, not royal, smells of starch and silence. The maid won't meet your eyes this morning. She lifts your hair gently, pins it with fingers that tremble, and when she steps back, her hands are red with the guilt she won't admit to. She doesn't speak. No one does. Outside, the chapel bell tolls. But it doesn't sound like a call to prayer. It sounds like laughter, like mockery dressed in solemnity. Once you prayed every morning. Even in the early days of this prison you prayed. But not today. Because today is the day they say God will come for you. And you've begun to wonder, what if he already did? What if he came in the form of a crown, a kiss from a king, a daughter born beneath a comet and condemned for her mother's gaze? You were queen. You wore ermine and gold. You spoke in French and Latin and words sharper than men expected from a woman who smiled so often. And now they call you witch. Now they say you bewitched the king with your eyes, your laugh, your refusal to kneel too quickly. But none of those lies mattered once the crown tilted. Before we go any further, if you're still here, if you're still listening, then maybe you too feel it. That this story was never just about Anne. It's about the cost of a voice in the wrong century, the weight of a gaze that refused to look down, the myth of mercy when silence was never safe. If these are the stories you want uncovered, the ones buried behind palaces and portraits, then let's stay together. Consider subscribing. Hit like if the past still echoes. And leave a comment. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because somehow, across centuries and continents, we're meeting here. In the cold breath, before history swings its blade. Your hands are folded now, but not in prayer. You stand at the window and listen. To the guards shifting outside. To the wind that hisses against the tower stones. To your own heart, which beats not with fear, but with something worse. Clarity. You're not afraid of death. You're afraid of being forgotten, of your daughter being told you deserved it, of your name being ground down into rumour, then dust. The door creaks open. The priest enters. Behind him, the headsman waits. You don't speak. Not yet. Because queens are supposed to die with grace, but no one ever taught you how to die like this. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and damp wool, but beneath it all was something sourer, the scent of fear wearing the mask of law. They said you'd be given a chance to speak. They said the charges would be read plainly, that your innocence would be weighed like coin. But the scale had already tipped before you walked in. You stood before a jury of peers, not your peers, his. Men who owed their lands to the king. Men who had whispered about your ambition long before he ever laid eyes on you. Men who would not meet your gaze because they already knew the end. The accusations were absurd. Adultery, treason, incest. They said you seduced 5 men, that you plotted the king's death with laughter and poetry, that your own brother shared your bed. They didn't need evidence. They had glances. They had letters. They had a king's growing regret. And regret in a monarch is a dangerous thing. Your brother George was tried first. They said he laughed too loudly in your presence. They said he carried a book of forbidden verses. They said he looked at you the way no brother should. But the truth was simpler. George defended you. He reminded the court of your wit, your loyalty, your grace. And in doing so, he signed his own death sentence. The others followed. Francis Weston, Henry Norris, William Brereton, Mark Smeaton. Some were tortured, Some confessed under pressure, some never had a chance to deny. They were executed days before you, stacked like broken truths, one atop the other. By the time you stood before your judges, they didn't see a queen. They saw a problem to be solved, a mistake to be erased. You spoke with dignity. You reminded them of your service, your faith, your marriage vows. But they were deaf by design. The louder you defended yourself, the guiltier you sounded. A quiet woman might be pitied. A clever one must be silenced. One man in the jury wept. Just one. But even he didn't speak for you, because the law was not on trial. You were, and the verdict had already been signed by the hand that once caressed your cheek, Henry. He never came to your defence, never questioned the charges, never looked you in the eye again after the tower swallowed you. He let the machine grind forward, because he didn't need truth. He needed space. Space to marry Jane. Space to have a son. Space to rewrite a story where you were the villain and he the injured king. Your crown had been cracked long before your body was. The court only needed to break the rest. When they read your sentence, your face did not change, because deep down you had known. Justice was never an option. Not for a woman who ruled too boldly. Not for a queen who forgot to be quiet. They didn't kill a queen. They killed an invention. A woman made of rumours stitched together with ink and envy. By the time the blade was raised, you were no longer Anne Boleyn. You were the witch, the seductress, the unnatural thing that had wormed its way into a king's bed and poisoned the throne. They whispered about your sixth finger, about the mole on your neck that must have been the devil's mark, about your eyes, how they looked too directly, how they lingered too long. Women weren't supposed to look like that, or speak like that, or want anything but to please. You wanted more, and that they could not forgive. So they rewrote your body into something grotesque. You weren't beautiful. You were bewitching. Your miscarriage wasn't a tragedy. It was proof that God had turned away, that your womb was cursed, that the child had died because it carried your ambition in its blood. They called it justice, but it was theatre, a carefully crafted spectacle, one where the audience already knew how it would end, but stayed anyway, for the pleasure of watching the flames. It wasn't only men who joined the chorus, the women did too. They said you were too clever, too bold, too proud. They didn't hate you because you failed. They hated you because you dared to rise, because when you walked through court in silks and pearls, they saw themselves in the stone beneath your heel. And when you fell, they exhaled. There's comfort in seeing a woman brought low. It reminds the others that silence is safer, that beauty fades, that power kills. You became a cautionary tale before your blood even dried. And the worst part, you were never allowed to answer back. Your voice was silenced, your letters destroyed, your legacy carved by the hands that hated you most. The monster they invented wore your face but not your truth. She seduced kings. You challenged one. She cursed children. You carried them. She was hungry for power. You were desperate to survive it. But history doesn't always care for precision. It prefers a cleaner narrative. And monsters are easier to bury than martyrs. So they made one of you. And centuries later, she still walks through classrooms and novels, head held high on a neck they claimed was too proud to live. He arrived days before your death, but he didn't speak much. A swordsman from Calais, hand-picked, flown in like a gift or a warning. They said he was the best, that he could end a life with one swift blow, that his blade was so sharp you wouldn't feel it. As if that was kindness. As if the pain of your death was the part that needed softening. He watched you from a distance, not as a butcher watches meat, but as a man watches a fire that he doesn't want to put out. He saw the posture you maintained even as the court recoiled. He saw how you walked to the scaffold with no one to steady you. He saw how your hands did not tremble, even though everyone expected them to. He never asked for forgiveness, and you never offered it, because it wasn't his to seek. You thanked him instead. You thanked the man who would kill you. I hear I shall not die affrighted, you said. That was your last attempt at control, to choose grace when they gave you none. You knelt on the scaffold without a block. The sword would strike from behind. No warning, no count. You adjusted your dress yourself. You covered your legs for modesty. Even now, even here, they would not let you die without scrutiny. The crowd was silent, not in reverence, in hunger. For once, the drama they whispered about was real, unfolding in front of them. You spoke your final words clearly. You did not curse Henry. You did not cry. You spoke of God, of mercy, of the king who had once been good to you. But everyone knew you were speaking through a locked jaw. This wasn't mercy. It was choreography. Your last act in a pageant meant to make your death feel noble, so theirs could feel just. And the Frenchman, he did what none of them could. He ended it cleanly. No spectacle, no gory delay. He gave you a silence the court never offered. He gave you the dignity the crown had taken. His blade was the only honest thing that touched you that year. And in the moment before it fell, he looked into your eyes. He did not flinch. He did not sneer. He saw you, not the monster, not the queen, just the woman. And for that single breath of time, you were no longer on trial. You were human again. Then the sword cut the air, and everything else was stillness. While you counted your breaths in the tower, he counted the days until your replacement. Henry did not weep. He did not fast. He did not mourn like a husband losing his wife. He signed your death warrant and then picked out a new ring. The morning your head touched straw, he wore white. White for celebration, not grief. White, as if your execution were a coronation in reverse. By afternoon, he was riding to Jane Seymour. Not quietly, not hidden in shadows, publicly, proudly, as if shedding you was an act of rebirth. The bells that rang for your death still echoed through the streets as Jane stepped into the role you were still warm in. This wasn't just betrayal, it was choreography. Henry wanted the world to see that England was moving on, that the sins you'd supposedly committed had already been washed away by the soft hands of another woman. Jane was everything you weren't, meek, silent, pliable. At least that's what the court told itself. But Henry didn't want a wife, he wanted a womb, and yours had failed to give him a son. That was your greatest crime, not the laughter, not the wit, not even the rumours. It was the baby born lifeless, the boy who didn't survive, the ghost who killed your crown. And so, he needed you gone, not because he hated you, but because he couldn't bear to be reminded that even kings are sometimes powerless. Anne Boleyn was a story that had to end so a New England could begin. One with order, one with heirs, one where the Queen didn't speak unless asked. So the court smiled, and the poets rewrote the lines, and the crowd squinted until they forgot what they saw. History gave him what he wanted, a neat transition, a clean slate. Tragedy swallowed and softened until no one asked, what did it cost your body, your mind, your daughter? What did it take to turn a woman into a lesson? She was 2 years and 8 months old, too young to understand death, old enough to feel the absence. One day her mother kissed her goodnight. The next day no one said your name. Elizabeth Tudor wasn't told the truth. They didn't say you were executed. They didn't say you were innocent. They simply moved on. Your portraits were removed, your initials scraped off tapestries. Your motto, the most happy, was painted over with the silence of shame. The court called her illegitimate, bastard, a daughter of treason, as if blood could be corrupted by rumour. She was shuffled between households, watched closely, never told why her father looked through her instead of at her. But she remembered. She remembered the lullabies sung in French, the scent of your hands, the firmness in your voice when others bent. They tried to teach her obedience. She learned strategy instead. They tried to shape her into a Tudor. She held fast to what little she had of you. And when the day came, when death and chance cleared the path, when the crown was finally hers, she didn't ask permission to wear it. She walked into power like someone who had already survived 1,000 executions. Not her own, but yours. She spoke your name in private. She studied your fall in silence. And when courtiers warned her about being too bold, too clever, too unmarried, she wore your ghost like armour, because she understood the cost of being underestimated, because she knew that history could unmake a woman in a single breath, unless she held the pen herself. Elizabeth ruled for 44 years, and in every calculated glance, in every sharpened phrase, in every refusal to kneel to a husband or parliament, you were there, not as a tragedy, but as a warning she never forgot. You were erased from the story, but your daughter rewrote it, and the world remembered you because she never let them forget. The story they told was elegant, simple, digestible. Anne Boleyn was guilty. She betrayed the king. She bewitched him, then betrayed him. She flew too close to the sun and fell as all vain women must. It was a parable, not a history, and parables serve the powerful. Because if she was guilty, then Henry wasn't a tyrant. He was a betrayed husband, a grieving father, a monarch forced to act. If she was guilty, then England could move forward cleanly. No blood under its boots, no lies on its breath. The lie made things easier. It gave the court a way to sleep. It gave the church a way to bless it. It gave historians a way to close the chapter without asking too many questions. But the truth is knotted, and it smells of fear, envy, and blood. The truth is a woman who rose too fast, spoke too sharply, and dreamed too far. A woman who gave birth to a daughter instead of a son. A woman who miscarried and watched her womb become a weapon used against her. A woman whose every smile was reinterpreted as strategy, whose every word was rewritten as threat, whose very being became inconvenient. They didn't execute Anne Boleyn. They executed the discomfort she caused. And to make it palatable, to make it seem like justice, not fear, they wrapped it in myth. They whispered about affairs, about incest, about witchcraft. They turned her into a cautionary tale so that other women would know what happens to those who speak too often, laugh too loudly, reach too high. And centuries later, we still carry pieces of those lies. We call her manipulative, ambitious, dangerous. Even in retellings meant to redeem her, she is still blamed for desiring power, as if wanting more was the original sin. But the truth is not that she wanted too much. It's that the world refused to give her enough. They built a crown heavy enough to crush her, then smiled when it did. Because it wasn't just her body they needed to be broken. It was the idea that a woman could rise by her mind, hold a throne by her own will, and refuse to apologize for either. And so they told lies. To protect the king. To protect the throne. To protect the illusion that justice and monarchy could exist in the same room. And we believed them, because believing them is easier than looking directly at what power is. There is no grand tomb, no golden effigy, no carved epitaph that tells the world what you endured. Your body was buried in haste, head and heart separated, your name omitted. A queen laid to rest in a common arrow chest, the kind used to store weapons, not women who once wore crowns. Stone covers the place they think you lie, but it says nothing. Not who you were, not what they did. It's easier that way, clean, uncomplicated, like the stories they wrote about you. Anne Boleyn, the seductress, the witch, the woman who deserved it. But the truth doesn't rot like a body. It waits, in letters not burned, in glances recorded in margins, in the contradictions left behind by men who couldn't agree on what made you dangerous. It lingers in the soft correction of a historian's footnote, in the half-removed embroidery of a forgotten tapestry, in the eyes of your daughter, painted centuries ago, eyes that look out from the canvas with your fire. Because you weren't just a queen, you were a storm, you were a woman who read Latin, who debated with scholars, who shaped England not by accident but by intention, and they knew it. That's why they feared you. It wasn't your flirtation, it was your intellect, it wasn't your beauty, it was your defiance. You refused to be quiet, to be patient, to be grateful for crumbs when you were born with hunger in your bones, and so they took everything, your title, your child's legitimacy, your breath. But they couldn't take the truth, because truth, unlike power, doesn't need to be paraded. It only needs to survive, and yours did. It bled through centuries of distortion. It haunted kings who slept beside new queens and still heard your name in their dreams. It found its way back, through ink, through voice, through women who read your story and refused to forget. They buried you beneath silence, but silence is not the same as peace, and the truth is still whispering. You were not a warning, you were a beginning. You were not a monster, you were a mirror, held up to a court that couldn't stand to see itself. They called you many things, but not the right ones. So let us call you what they never did. Brave, brilliant, undeniable, Anne Boleyn, the fire they feared, the truth they tried to erase, the queen who still bleeds into the page.